President Trump crushes the fake news media by exposing their rampant and blatant corruption with a single tweet. That's what we'll be talking about on today's video. Trump's war on the mainstream Marxist media continues to ramp up, with his latest tweet demonstrating relational ties between the Democrats and left-wing activists disguised as journalists in his latest tweet. So we're going to take a look at those ties and how they signal a radical corruption that's already decimating what's barely left of the mainstream media's credibility. I think you're going to absolutely love it. Greetings, everyone. Dr. Steve here with you. Certainly hope you're all safe and sound. If this is your first time with us and you're looking for some daily encouragement and optimism in the midst of all this nonsense from the left-wing Marxist media, then you have found your oasis in this channel. We analyze current events and some super awesome conservative trends so you can live in the present in light of even better things to come. We help you to think better so that you can feel better. So if you haven't already done so, you know what to do. Make sure to smack that button, subscribe button. It'd be an absolute privilege to have you as a regular part of this channel, where each and every day we get to celebrate the inevitable collapse of left-wing globalism, the unstoppable rise of a new conservative age. So let's start with our video chat question of the day. Do you believe that the mainstream media will survive the age of Trump? Let us know in the comments section below. Do you believe that outlets like CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times, will they ever regain even a semblance of their credibility after Trump's 2 terms exposing their hypocrisy? Because it really does appear that the mainstream media has been irreparably damaged by the president. So much so that it may indeed be one of the most lasting of his already very impressive legacies. But before we get into it, let's give a huge shout out to the sponsor of this video. And that is Prepper's Peak new solar water heater. All right, let's be blunt here, okay? The more we become trapped in our homes because of this recent pandemic going on around the world, the more we're going to appreciate the solar water heater, as it turns out to be our best friend. The solar water heater is an amazing device that allows you to heat and boil water outdoors using simply sunlight. It can heat water in as little as 30 minutes and it'll work anywhere the sun shines. You can use it to boil water, to cook noodles and rice, sterilize water for drinking. It's easy to clean. It can be used anywhere there's sunlight. And the best part is that if you click on the link below, you can get 15% off. So what could be better than that? So don't wait. Click on the link below before they sell out and get your own Patriot Sun cooker today. All right, so let's dive in here. President Trump continues to ramp up his war against the fake news media, the mainstream Marxist media. Yesterday on his Twitter page, Trump retweeted a photo of news personalities who are related to family members who are prominent Democrats. It's a highly revealing picture, and it helps to put the mainstream media in context in terms of its overall relationship to the swamp. The picture shows some obvious relations. Chris Cuomo, CNN, related to Andrew Cuomo, the radical left governor of New York. Valerie Jarrett, who is a senior advisor to President Obama, is pictured next to her daughter, Laura Jarrett, who works for the ultra-liberal CNN. Jay Carney, who is press secretary for Obama, is pictured next to his wife, Claire Shipman, who is a senior national correspondent for ABC's Good Morning America. You get the pattern here. The former national security advisor to Obama, Susan Rice, is pictured next to her husband, Ian Cameron, who's an ABC News producer. The list goes on and on. You see a very predictable pattern. It's a very revealing picture, and what it does is it underscores the corruption of the mainstream media. And so Trump tweeted out with the picture this comment: this is why it's not really the lamestream media, it's the rigged media, and it's what I'm up against. It was corrupt in 2016, now it's much more corrupt, and what you are seeing is the least of it. But we will win again, amen to that. Now, he's absolutely right on this, on both accounts, by the way. The media is fundamentally corrupt, and yes, he will most certainly win re-election. The single most accurate election prediction model, if you don't know, is called the primary model, and it gives Trump a 91% chance of winning re-election. But more to the point here, Trump is right about the corruption of the mainstream media. He's pointing out that this corruption, at least superficially, that is on the surface, is found in the fact that the mainstream media has effectively wedded together political partisanship and news coverage, right? I'll say that again because I think it's so central to understanding, at least in part, what Trump is getting at here. the mainstream media is corrupt because they have wedded together, in terms of these relationships, their blatant political partisanship with what they consider to be news coverage. Take this snapshot, for example, from the 2016 election. Among the top 100 largest newspapers in America, just two, the Las Vegas Review-Journal and the Florida Times-Union Jacksonville, endorsed Trump. This is back in 2016. And this fellow who writes the story, Reed Wilson, he felt for whatever reason the need to point out that the Review-Journal is owned by Sheldon Adelson, who's a casino magnate who spent millions trying to elect Trump. It's actually a fascinating caveat to the endorsement because of how radically myopic it turns out to be, or blatantly misleading. And it's misleading, that kind of caveat that he put is, because he's saying, oh, and by the way, one of the two papers endorsing Trump is owned by one of his allies who's actively trying to get him elected. But what that reporter doesn't seem to get, that this caveat is misleading because it suggests that the other papers are somehow objective and rationally, disinterested in their endorsements. And that, my friends, is where the true corruption of the mainstream media lies. You see, it's not just in the superficial connection between so many in the media who are related to left-wing liberal Democrats or their family members. It's not just that. That's its surface level. It's a fact that the media has wedded their political partisanship with their news coverage while simultaneously claiming that they are objective, impartial journalists. That's the corruption. That's the unmitigated lie that is at the heart of the fake news media that Trump is calling out. Again, it's not simply that they're married political partisanship with their news coverage, okay? We're going to find that in itself is actually not the problem. The problem is when you deliberately attempt to cloak that blatant partisanship with an overt denial of that partisanship. That's when you have nothing less than a disposition of deliberate deception passed off as professional news coverage. That is what President Trump is calling out here. And that's what all independent content creators and citizen journalists and the whole of the alternative media are calling out. They're calling out the overt and deceptive hypocrisy of the mainstream Marxist media, the vast majority of which are in reality left-wing activists who use their supposedly objective journalism as a deliberate means of furthering their left-wing political agenda. There's actually a field of study in the academy known as agenda setting theory. Agenda setting theory is a field of study that explores the influence of the media on setting the political agenda and prioritizing political causes and policies. It's long been recognized that what the mainstream media focuses on or what current events get attention is a major driver of what counts as a viable political agenda, which of course is always radical left. And this is why we're not exaggerating the least when we say that these reporters are, in fact, left-wing activists disguised as journalists. They are political agenda setters, and they know it. The problem, of course, the corruption, comes about when they deliberately disguise this agenda setting as simply impartial, objective, disinterested news that's inherently agenda-free, politically neutral. Therein lies the corruption that's going on here. Now, what we have to understand is that it hasn't always been this way, okay? Scholars of the media generally agree that modern journalism began with the Jacksonian era, and that's where we see the rise of the mass press. And what we find here is that papers and magazines were unapologetic advocates for specific political parties and positions. As a matter of fact, the papers often spoke in the first person plural we when talking about policies, which included the readers in support of political positions in opposition to their political opponents. So, for example, I live right next door to Maryland, and in Cecil County, Maryland, they had for years two local papers, the Cecil County Democrat and the Cecil County Whig. Those were your two papers, right? The Democrat and the Whig. Now, of course, we all know who the Democrats were. The Whigs were the political precursors to the Republican Party, right? So what you need to get here is that this was a thoroughly democratic conception of news. This was what a free press was all about, is where proponents of political policies, all with clearly articulated values and biases from either the political left or political right, made their arguments for their positions, by interpreting current events in light of their political values and proposed policies. Sound familiar? That's precisely what we do on this channel. This is what talk radio does. Talk radio in many ways is a return to this normal. The news source, right, the host of the show, is fully upfront with his or her political values and interprets the news in light of those values. And in a truly democratic public sphere, you can hear the news interpreted by both the right and the left, the center right, the center left, the extreme right, the extreme left, whatever, and you can make up your own mind. That was considered honest news reporting. But then in the 20th century, journalism, like so many of our other institutions, journalism ended up embracing a thoroughly globalist, modernist conception of the world that began to despise and disdain nationalism and nationalist sentiments. It started looking at the world, internationally in terms of the emerging, globalist organizations like the UN and eventually the EU and the World Health Organization, right? And through a series of events, the media ended up becoming thoroughly corporatist and globalist and is now the chief proponent, the major propaganda wing of all things globalist and progressive. And they pretend that such globalist progressivism is inevitable. It's just the way things are. And so all they're doing is reporting objective reality rather than a radical political partisanship that's fundamentally at odds with the customs, cultures, and traditions that characterize world populations for centuries. So what's so neat in all of this is that the rise of the alternative media, and with President Trump calling out the mainstream Marxist media as being inherently deceptive and corrupt, everyone is back to realizing that all news is going to be reported from some kind of value system. That there's simply no such thing as completely, objective, value-free, disinterested news coverage. And so on the one hand, we're going back to the way things were originally when news media made their values explicit, like in talk radio, citizen journalists, alternative news outlets like Breitbart, Gateway Pundit, and the like. But what we're also seeing is that the continued attempt by outlets like CNN to deceive by pretending they're an objective news source is now becoming the butt of ridicule at this point. It's laughable. No one's buying it anymore. And that perhaps may be the most significant and longest lasting of Trump's already very impressive building legacy. Now, before you go, you will definitely want to check out my latest video on Tesla CEO Elon Musk leading this massive rebellion against the liberal lockdown in California, all of which shows that the populist revolt against the ruling political class today is growing by leaps and bounds. In fact, in many respects, it's just getting started. I think you're going to absolutely love it. So make sure to click on the link, and I will see you over there. God bless.